Awesome. All right. All yours. Oh, I didn't introduce you. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. I'm sorry. I did in class, but I don't want to take time away from the talk.
No problem. No problem. I'm Kristen. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you. Went to graduate of Cal Poly from back in 2011, and had Enrica as my professor, and landlord for a little bit as well. Yeah, I'm going to dive into the presentation, and I'll kind of go through my journey. I figured that would kind of help so you guys could know where I started and where I ended up and where I am now. Let's see, can you guys see my screen? Yeah, okay. And then I'll hit play. Hopefully you're seeing the right screen. You're not seeing presenter view, are you? You're only seeing...
Yeah, we're seeing what we are supposed to see, the perfect...
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, so I work at Mattel right now. I've been here at Mattel for 6 years, working on Jurassic and Pixar toys. But I kind of wanted to go back to Cal Poly and say, you know, kind of my design journey and how I got to where I am now. So as you can see here, I'm going to move something on my screen because it's blocking what I'm looking at. Hang on one second, if I can. Maybe not. All right. Well, anyway. So as I said, I have a BFA in art and design, like I assume many of you probably are working on right now. I studied at Cal Poly from 2007 to 2011. I majored in graphic design for my concentration. I like to say I minored in track and field and cross country because that was a big part of my college life. That's a joke. But I also took as many fine art classes as I possibly could at Cal Poly because I kind of chose Cal Poly in graphic design knowing that I wanted to do a D1 track program and I wanted to study in art. And I looked into art schools, but not obviously a lot of art schools don't have the track programs and things like that I was hoping for. And I love fine art and all that, but I thought graphic design was potentially something that could get me a better job. And I didn't know a ton about graphic design when I applied to Cal Poly. I obviously had to make a portfolio and I was learning on the fly a bit and just had more fine art in my portfolio because that's what I worked on in high school a lot. But as far as the concentration, I chose graphic design and I was like, I'm going to take as many fine art classes as possible because a part of me always wanted to do animation. And so I kind of always had in the back of my mind, maybe I'd go to grad school for animation. So yeah, while I was at school, I took, like I said, several of Enrica's class, including her Maya class, because I was like, oh, that's part of animation. I'm going to try to learn that. And I worked as a graphic designer for Mustang Athletics, which was super fun. I basically got to put a lot of my athlete friends on the posters all around Mott Gym and all over campus. So that was super fun. And I was a graphic designer at the TV show CSI Miami for 2 summers, which was really cool. It was through a friend of my mom that I got that job. And it was super cool to kind of actually learn what it's like to work in an industry. So that was super neat. But these are some pictures from way back. Enrica, you probably remember a lot of this crew. This was our senior, we did like a picnic after we graduated, and this was basically the art and design crew.
Wow. Yeah, I remember most of these kids. It's amazing. Thanks for bringing them back.
Yeah, I had to look back down memory lane and of course some track photos and then a soccer game, all of us hanging out at Cal Poly. But Enrica, you're gonna laugh at this too.
Oh my God, that's my husband in Galileo when he was tiny. He is now 13 and taller and bigger than you can imagine.
So I don't know if some of you are studying graphic design. Obviously, we had to do a campaign. This was Slow Cap, which was like a child abuse prevention thing, and so we teamed up with a photographer and a graphic design team and created these posters. And I worked with Enrica's husband and son, and Charmaine, you probably recognize on there as well, and her daughter. And we took these adorable photos to kind of just say, you know, the parents should be there for their kids. And
the third parent is my husband's best friend, Greg. I didn't know he was involved. That's awesome.
I couldn't remember if it was Charmaine's friend or your friend, but that's right.
Greg and Annabelle is her name. Yeah.
So, you know, obviously we utilized the people with kids we knew at the time. But I had to bring some of these back. This was some of the graphic design work from Cal Poly. This was a book I designed for, we had to pick a
poem, and this was or a story, short story. This was Edgar Allan Poe, and do some nice typography. This is some of the stuff I did at Cal Poly for the athletics team. So that was a lot of fun. I did that for a few years and got to make the posters, the schedule cards, the souvenir programs, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and then of course, like I said, I did as many of the fine art classes as I could. We weren't allowed, I don't know if they allow double majoring now, but we weren't allowed to do 2 concentrations at the time. So I was like, anytime I could take an Art 101 class or an art class with Michael Miller, a ton of classes with him. They were great. And so practice those skills as well, because I knew that was something I'd need in the future. But yeah, so after I graduated from Cal Poly, most of my friends were applying for jobs right away. And I, again, kind of knew I liked graphic design, but I liked the illustration, drawing, and like symbol version, like symbology and less typography a lot more. And so I still had the idea I wanted to do animation in my head. And I was like, instead of applying to jobs, I'm going to apply to grad schools. And I looked up a bunch of grad schools at the time and ended up going to Academy of Art in San Francisco, which was great. I think a lot of people, depending on what it is you go to grad school for, some people might not think it's the best thing. Some people do. I think for what I'm doing now, I think grad school was very important. Do I think I needed to go to school, not like to grad school and to a private school? No, not necessarily. There's plenty of things you can do online now with online classes, but I just did not know that at the time. And it's kind of grad school that made me realize that. But also networking within grad school is, I think, helped a lot of people I went to school with get jobs as well. So I studied visual development for animation there. That's basically concept art for animation. So that's character design, background design, prop design, that kind of stuff. And I was there from 2011 to 2013, lived in San Francisco. It was really cool to be there. I was there 5 years, a great city to live in. And I also was able to have 1 more year of eligibility for track and cross country, which helped me pay for part of grad school, which was great. And then basically, like I said, that like grad school was a great way to network with people in the industry. And I would attend a big animation conference every year and meet different industry professionals and go back each year and reconnect with them. And that was like a major thing. Like I'll explain later on how I got my job at Mattel, sort of from networking. And then while I was going to grad school, I was also freelance, doing some freelance stuff on the side as a graphic designer to get some money on the side. And then so with grad school, this is some grad school pictures, had to throw that in there. I, again, was able to network with professors, get the chance to go to Pixar a few times, which was awesome, just across the bay, with my professors and teachers. That's a Holly festival there where we're covered in color. That was super cool. They had a lot of fun events, again, the track team and one of my classes. But a very fun experience, and I feel like I learned a ton. So this is where I started learning more character design. I think I was always pretty good at doing very realistic style art. Like I could like look at something and copy it really well, draw faces, draw a still life, things like that. But it was definitely harder for me to make a cute character from my own head, basically. So that was kind of what I learned in grad school a lot, and how to create these characters, how to do turnarounds of the characters, front view, side view, back view, how to give them personality, and keep them like a very simple style, or if you're going to go for like a 3D animation, a little more detailed. So these are some of the characters that I worked on in grad school. That were some fun characters there. And then we also, visual development includes like basically you're drawing cinematic scenes, you're doing storyboards, all that kind of stuff. And so this was this little bandit, I like to call him, this little raccoon on the bottom there. He lived in New York and was trying to always steal trash from the parties at a college nearby. So that was his
he kind of, the story there was he could do like parkour around the city and then like steal trash. And so I created this this scene for him, and all the sketches on the side were all different views of what would be the best like view of seeing bandits like jump around the city. And basically for visual development, we would do these color scenes to basically like plot points, like the biggest plot points of the film, which is what we ended up doing. The goal of, at the end, my thesis was basically coming up with a story and creating the characters, the backgrounds and scenes and props from that story. So you'll see a little more of that here. This was all part of my thesis. This was a story I created about a little boy, Rudy. At the bottom there, you can see him next to the girl in the middle of the lineup. And he was a little boy in the Italian Alps who was afraid of heights, but he came from a long line of really good climbers, and he wanted to get an Edelweiss flower from the top of the mountain for the girl, Annie, he likes. And of course, he runs into the monsters on the mountains and has to face his fears of climbing this mountain to get that flower. So this was kind of the lineup of characters that I designed for that. And then I did a 70-page book that has like a ton of art for this, but these are some of my favorites. Obviously that bottom picture is the moment where he gets the Edelweiss flower from the top of the mountain with his little goat friend, Karina. And the other scene there is when he's coming back down the mountain and his brothers are competing in a climbing competition, and he sees them and he's gonna go surprise the whole town for getting the Edelweiss flower, because only the best climbers can get to the top to get it. And you can see on the side there, like the little house designs. Those are all the little sketches that I started with to then create that village that you see down there. Lots of little thumbnail sketches to start all that. So then after grad school, for a while I was doing some freelance design, and I was looking for a job in San Francisco or in LA. Looking at a lot of animation companies and looking at graphic design jobs as well, just because I needed something at the time. And I stumbled upon this job, actually, I think it was on Craigslist. I found it, and it was like, do you want to design stuff for Disney and things like that? And I was like, is this a real job? And I looked, and it was actually a toy and publishing company in San Francisco. At the time, it was called Art350 Studios, and then it became Bendon Publishing, which basically any coloring book you look at is Bendon Publishing. But Art350 Studios had a little more. So basically those huge art sets that you see that have 100 crayons and 100 markers and 1,000 stickers at Costco that are like Disney Princess or Avengers. That's what we did at our Art350 Studios. So Bendon bought us to try to compete a little more with some of the other toy companies that do that kind of stuff. And these are some examples of things I did. This was a pillow book for Ninja Turtles. So it's essentially a pillow that opens up and the pages are made of fabric. And I did the layouts for that. And then the My Little Pony is actually a wooden dollhouse that has wooden characters with magnetic clothing. And so it's kind of like paper dolls, but with magnets. So those were some fun things. So the cool thing about this was it was definitely mostly graphic design. But I got to illustrate a lot of things as well. So like you can't really see it in here, but the back room of like where the ponies are there, that I got to design that room based on like looking at what the artwork for My Little Pony was. And I got to like illustrate some of the backgrounds of the Ninja Turtle stuff. So it was like a little bit of illustration every now and then, trying to match the look and feel of whatever license it was. But mostly it was graphic design. So I kind of knew like this was a stepping stone for where I really wanted to be. But it was a great job, and I did it for almost 3 years. And the biggest thing about this job that helped me was I was working on licensed products. So working with Nickelodeon for the Ninja Turtles one, working with Hasbro, and who was it? I guess it was Hasbro, yeah, for the My Little Pony one. We did a lot of Disney products, like I said, Avengers and Princess. And so I got that experience of what it's like to work with a licensor, because they give a lot of feedback back and forth. so after the 3 years there, I knew I wanted to either work in the animation industry and do more concept art and what I studied in school, or B, potentially work at a toy company, because I was basically working at a toy and publishing company at the time. And I was like, that's a good step. Maybe I have that on my resume. Maybe I can get into that industry. Never, though, did I even think of toy design, really, like specifically. I thought working at a toy company doing something more similar to this. I didn't really think of like actually designing the toys itself. But I kind of stumbled upon the job at Mattel. So at the time I was looking at jobs in LA. I was networking heavily with all the people I knew in the animation industry, which again, I highly recommend. And I decided, I was living in San Francisco, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a trip to LA and meet up with everybody I know in the animation industry and just talk to them, ask them questions, show them my portfolio. I reached out. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time of people in the animation industry. And I met up with a guy from Disney I knew from the conferences that I went to, and asked him a bunch of questions. This guy who was the main guy on the podcast worked for Cartoon Network. And I met up with him. I just, reached out to these people basically and were like, hey, I'm going to be in the LA area. I'd love to pick your brain. Can I buy you coffee? I'd love to chat with you. If you have time, I'll buy you, maybe like buy you lunch. And I basically lined up my day. So I talked to, I think I ended up hanging out with like 5 different people from different industries. So it was like, I started when I got here. I had worked at CSI Miami, like I said earlier, and I stopped in LA, and I got off the plane, got my rental car, went straight to where I used to work at CSI Miami. And they were now working on the show Scorpion. And I went to the set and I met up with all my friends there. I was like, hey, I'm in town. I was at the time I had applied to Mattel, but I hadn't heard back from them. And I was like, I'm talking to Mattel. It's possible that I could move down here. Like, just wanted to see what you guys were doing. And I touched base with them. And then I went straight from there to meet up with a friend of a friend. I didn't even know her. It was like my friend Leah from Cal Poly, who I ran track with. She was like, oh, a friend of mine works at Disney. Like, you should meet up with her. So I went and met up with her, bought her coffee and picked her brain a bit. And then I stayed with a friend of mine in LA. And the next morning I drove over to meet with the guy from Cartoon Network for coffee, had coffee with him. He looked through my portfolio, gave me some advice. Then I went straight from there to another guy at Disney Animation, TV animation. The girl from Disney was in consumer products and he was in TV animation, and bought him lunch and talked to him for a bit, and then basically headed home the next day. And I actually found out like that Monday after returning that I got the job at Mattel. So even though that part didn't help me get the job, I feel like all that networking all has helped me and other friends get jobs in the future as well, and like help me make a network within LA. And I still keep in touch with a lot of those people. And with the job at Mattel, I kind of lucked out because it basically said designer on the job title. And I thought graphic designer. I read through all the requirements, and this is like a big thing I would say anyone looking for a job right now, like apply to every job. Even if you don't fit all the qualifications, apply. If it's like something that you can do and most of the qualifications you fit, don't be afraid, because you can't do one of the things to not apply, because people do that. And they don't, a big part of the job is learning on the fly and learning the job. And you just apply no matter what, because I don't think if it said toy designer on that job description, I probably would not have applied, because I would have been like, oh, I don't know anything about plastic toys. I don't know what that is. But it said designer, and I was like, oh, I know most of these things. I don't know how to do Rhino, which is another 3D program like Maya, but I was like, oh, well, that's like the one thing I don't know. And so I applied and I talked to the guy, and the first guy I talked to didn't know a ton about the job. He knew I worked at a toy company, but he was like just trying to sell it in basically. And it wasn't until my actual interview with my now boss that
they said like, this is a toy design position. And I had my graphic design portfolio pulled up on it was a Zoom, it was actually a Skype meeting. And I had my graphic design portfolio ready to share. And when he described what the job was, I quickly like flipped over to my visual development portfolio and showed that instead. And I was like, these are my drawings. This is what this is what I have done in grad school, my character designs, my background designs, all that kind of stuff. And like, he told me more about the job. I picked their brains. They asked if I knew anything about plastics, and I was like, no, but I'm willing to learn. And at the end of the job, this is again my biggest tip to anyone applying for a job is at the end of the interview to ask if the job interviewer has any questions or concerns about your abilities or capabilities. And so I asked that question at the end, and they said, we see you can draw, we know you can draw, but you don't have any toy designs in your portfolio. Again, I had no idea it was a toy design position going into the job. And so I said, okay, no problem. Can I draw some up for you? Can I, take some time to draw up some designs? And they said, yeah, sure. So I got off the call with them, and that night I went to work, and then I got home from work that night, and I stayed up like all night drawing designs for Jurassic World toys. And I think I came up with like 5 different concepts and did a bunch of sketches, and I sent them like at 6 a.m. the next morning. And I was like, here's like 5 toy ideas for Jurassic World. And they thought they were great. And like, I found out I got the job like a week later or something, or 2 weeks later. But I really think had I not asked that question at the end, I wouldn't have been given that opportunity to be like, look, I can do this. And I basically went home and looked up toy design portfolios, like what do they look like? And I quickly like drew up some designs. So again, that was for the Jurassic World position, which you're looking here at one of the Spinosaurus toys I designed. So what I do at Mattel, I know I'll wrap this up. I want to have room for questions. What I do at Mattel is I'll draw, again, it's kind of like character design. It's very similar to concept art for animation, although it's going to be a physical product. So for this one, I sketched up the dinosaur. I said, look, it's going to have a double hinged jaw. It's going to have articulation on the shoulders, on the legs, on the neck. It's going to have a button on the top of the head that when you press it, that double hinged jaw opens up super wide. It's a pretty simple action figure. There's no sounds or anything, but then I had to draw obviously like what I wanted it to look like, the front view, the side view, the top view. We had to cheat the tail to be a little shorter so it fits in the package than what a real dinosaur would be, cheat the feet a little bit so that it can stand up. And that's how we came up with the Spinosaurus toy. And again, I'll show you some others. This is I learned so many, I know all the dinosaurs' names. It's a little, I'm like, my nephew loves it. My nephew is like the biggest dinosaur fan because I basically, he grew up with me designing these toys. So I know way too much about dinosaurs, but this is a Pachyrhinosaurus. And this is what I do is I'll do the 2D version you see at the top. I'll pick out the colors. I'll do, again, the front view, side view. I'll do everything, even like what I want the scales to look like, how big they're going to look. I can pick out references sometimes online, and I'll be like, I want it to look like this frog skin or this alligator skin, things like that, to give references to the person who will then sculpt it. So I'm not the sculptor. Some designers do sculpt at Mattel, but most, I would say, don't. We have a sculpting team that we pass our drawings over to, and they'll do the sculpts that you'll see at the bottom there. And then what I'll do is I'll draw over their sculpt and say what I want to change. So you can see some of my notes on like how wide I didn't like how narrow its nose was looking. So I was like, can we widen that up? And you can see let's make the tail a little longer. It's looking too short, or shrink the head down a little bit. It's too big and cartoony. Because we want these to look pretty realistic. And then you see the finished toy there. And this one had a button on its back. You can see on my top concept there, you press a button on the back and the head rams and it has sounds. And then this is another dinosaur, the Indoraptor from the second Jurassic World movie. This one was really fun to create. It had a lot of movement, and I think studying animation, I like making toys that actually can move really well and look like they come alive. And so this one, I had different joints in the middle of it. It has red eyes and an opening jaw, and when you press a button on the tail, its arms grab, because this dinosaur in particular had really long arms and could open doors. And they said it slinks like a cat. So I'll actually stop sharing for 1 second because I have a model of this one, which is kind of fun to share. If I can figure out how to stop sharing for a second. I can make, you can see this guy. So this is a model, so it's not the finished toy, it's not in plastic, but basically I wanted it to kind of come to life and slink like a cat. So when you move the tail, the whole body, here you can kind of see, can move and slink like a cat. And it kind of comes to life, right? It like looks like it's alive a little bit. And so there's a trigger button here on the tail, and when you do that, its arms grab. This guy's a model, so he's a little finicky. But he grabs with his arms, and then there's a bottom button on the bottom of his tail, where if you press that, his eyes glow red and he chomps, and you can hear his sounds. So yeah, this guy was like one of my favorite toys to design because he could actually kind of come to life and look like he's alive when the kids are playing with him. And then let me share again. Again, I want to have time for questions. So 1 second.
Someone is asking what is made out of if it's not made out of plastic. So what are the models made out of?
Some of them are 3D printed parts. I'm actually not sure exactly what that's made of. It's probably partially plastics, but it's a type of plastic, but it's not the type of plastic we would actually use in production. Basically, that could easily crack this model and break, whereas plastics that we would use for production, like PVC, wouldn't break, or ABS. Those plastics, have to go through drop tests and all that kind of stuff to pass for quality, so like a kid won't get hurt. Whereas this type of material that they use for this, which I actually don't know what that is they use for this model, would break basically and have sharp points if it broke because it's more fragile. Let me see. And then I'll jump into a couple Pixar things. This was a fun one. This is like a little fun unboxing type toy, a little collectible. So it was a Pixar ball that looks kind of like a piñata that you break open, and inside is confetti and a little keychain with a little guy that wiggles. So his waist is very loose and he kind of wiggles. You get a bouncy ball that's a Pixar ball and a sticker as well. So that was kind of the concept for that that I came up with. And a Buzz Lightyear that has an action chop, just like he has in the movie. You press a button on his back and he does his karate chop arm and he says phrases from the movie. So this is an example of my drawings for this one, and then what it translated into the actual toy. And then I got to work on a lot of collector toys as well. So this was one of the fun ones. I love Edna Mode from The Incredibles, and I got to work on this was more like a high-end toy. I think it's like $39. And it comes with swappable faces and all three of her outfits that you could change her into and pose her and display her for an adult collector. But yeah, thank you so much. That's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions. I know that's a lot in a little bit of time. Tried to get through it faster.
That is awesome. Thank you. I'm going to actually a student, is full disclosure, I told her she could talk 40 minutes at most because we wanted 20 minutes.
And I went
questions.
over, I'm so sorry.
No, you're doing great. I have obviously plenty, but let me have the student ask first. Okay, you guys go for it. You have 20 minutes to ask questions. Obviously, everybody is shy, but let's see.
Can you hear me?
Someone did talk. Yes.
I hear you. Go ahead, Walker.
Oh, thank you. I was going to ask about doing grad school. When you made that decision, had you like taken a job out like directly out of college? Like, what was the immediate place? Like after you got your degree, like what did you do first? Did you look for a job or did you immediately apply?
Do you mean after grad school or after Cal Poly?
After Cal Poly.
Okay, I immediately applied.
Okay.
And I was doing some freelance. So because I did the graphic design for athletics for Cal Poly, one of the guys we worked with to print those cards, he worked with a lot of other college athletics teams. So I did a lot of other random colleges like William and Mary and like different colleges from around. I did their schedule cards. So that was kind of a nice like little side gig that I had that I knew I'd have some money from, but I had immediately applied when everybody was like finishing up their final portfolios and applying to jobs.
I was applying to grad schools.
Okay. And so what went into the decision to like, instead of like hopping straight into a job, did you sort of decide you didn't have the skills to get a job that you wanted yet? And that's what your decision to go to grad school was?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think I could have gotten a graphic design job, but I knew that wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I was like, I didn't think I had the skills. I couldn't just apply to, like, obviously I didn't know anything about animation or concept art at the time. I just knew some fine art skills, and I knew I needed to get that knowledge to be able to get into the industry I ultimately wanted to get into.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
You know, now we have a class that I created called Concept Art and Storyboarding. And Nick Bockelman took over the illustration classes that now they're all digital illustration classes. There are 2 of them. So now things are moving a little bit, but it's still, I do agree that when you get out of Cal Poly, there's so little in that field that you don't have a portfolio that allows you to get straight into a job like that. Tsunami has a question.
Yes.
Hi, yeah. So I'm kind of feel similar in the way that when I kind of first came to Cal Poly, I wasn't really super into graphic design. And I kind of had to make a portfolio my senior year of high school to kind of get in. And initially I wanted to do toy design when I first started wanting to go to Cal Poly. And I kind of switched over to wanting to do animation by taking all these classes with Enrica. But, you know, seeing like how you kind of went back and forth in an opposite way, you know, it kind of shows interest for me in toy design more. But I was kind of interested, I guess, in like international toy design. Is that something that you've ever like kind of done? And does Mattel, I guess, outsource stuff like that? Or is that something that you guys do kind of in-house as well?
When you say international toy design, what do
So
you
do
mean?
all your toys go like get sold like worldwide as
Internationally? Yeah.
one thing, but or do you have to kind of design them differently?
That's a good question, actually. So most of our toys, like especially like the dinosaurs, for example, they're roaring, so that's not in a language that someone in China won't understand, right? So most of our toys are sold internationally. But if like we're selling a Buzz Lightyear in Mexico, it's going to speak Spanish. So it's basically the toy is the same, but the electronics in the toy is what changes. And we work with the electronics team to, right now we're doing a Buzz Lightyear that's going to be in Spanish and Portuguese, because that's like the areas that are going to be selling that toy. And the other, if it's like, if France or the European countries, if they aren't ordering that Buzz, we won't do a French Buzz, but if they are, we'll make a French Buzz as well. If that makes sense. So we'll change the toy a little bit, but as far as the features of the toy, we won't change that much. We do sometimes, like, we'll know that in China they like transforming toys a lot. So we took that knowledge and we actually worked on some Jurassic toys that could transform for that market in particular, and they're basically only for the Chinese market because they tend to like that. And there's also like we make larger toys, like many of our figures are like somewhere between 3 3/4 inches tall to 6 inches tall for an action figure. But we know that in Mexico in particular, they really like 12-inch figure dolls or action figures. Like Buzz Lightyear would be 12 inches instead of 6 inches or 7 inches tall. And so we make specific toys for that channel as well. So we do change them sometimes, but it really depends on the need. Like if it's like, we'll make those 12-inch tall ones specifically for Mexico because we know those sell well there. And we'll make the transforming ones specifically for China because they sell there well. But for everything else, it's like the main toys we make are going to be sold everywhere, and we'll just change the electronics if they're a voice we need to change for that. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually had one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I know you were talking about how you do, I guess, sort of the coloring and the texture of the models. I guess what are the other, I guess, steps in the design process from like concept to finalization that a designer would sort of be involved in?
So as the designer, we're like seeing the entire process of the toy from start to finish. So we're coming up with the toy idea. So I'll give the example of that dinosaur toy I showed that kind of slinks around. And we knew a little bit from the beginning
what the dinosaur was going to look like. We didn't even have a picture of it yet. They just told us, okay, it slinks like a cat, it's black, it has red eyes, and it grabs with its hands and can open doors, and it's part raptor. So that was like all we had to do to go off at first. And I was like trying to think of what could be a cool feature for that toy. And then finally, when we did get an image of what it actually looked like, I could draw it up, and I ended up making a little animation of the back of the dinosaur, like top view, kind of showing I want to move the tail like this, and then the body would move like this. And so then I will go to an engineer and a model maker, really a model maker. We have a whole team of model makers at Mattel, and say, hey, is this possible? Because I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but I think it'd be cool if it worked. And so the model maker then takes my drawing and my little animation in my drawing and says, I think I can make something like that. Like we'll put a little ball joint in its chest, we'll put a ball joint at its neck, and we'll turn the tail. And I think we can get that slinking motion you want and still be able to like put a button on its tail to make it move its arms and link the arms to the tail, as well as linking the jaw to the tail. So they kind of figure out that part, which is great because I don't know a ton of that. And they'll make a breadboard model. So like a pretty crude looking dinosaur, but like flat, but then it has all the mechanisms inside, and they're like, look, we made it, this is possible, now we can start sculpting it and like know what's going to be the internal mechanism. So then I'll start working with the sculptors, and they have to, again, like we had to cheat its chest a little bit to make it a little wider to fit the mechanisms in. So that's my job to like tweak the sculpt and be like, look, it has to be bigger, but I don't want it to look like it's pregnant and like fat and its belly. Like, can we make it, how thin and different can we make it so that it doesn't look weird, but it can fit the mechanisms in? And then I'm also working with the sound department. So we have a whole sound team as well. And we go in and we say, hey, we need new dinosaur sounds for this Indoraptor, which is part raptor, part T-Rex, part whatever. And they like create the sounds, which is awesome. Like I don't know any of that, how to do any of that, but we have an awesome sound team, and they create new dinosaur sounds for us all the time. And then we'll work with the electronics team, we'll work with the engineers, the model makers, and the sculptors. And then we have a team in Hong Kong that we work closely with, and they'll make the models that, like the model I shared with you earlier, they'll make those and send over the first models to us. And then we see if it's working the way we want it to. And then if it is, they'll then make our first shot, we call it, which is a first plastic model. And that's like to make sure everything's looking good. And it's kind of funny because the first shots come in and they're like any colors that they have in the plant, they'll just use. So I might get a dinosaur like this, but its tail will be pink, its body will be blue, its head will be green, one arm will be purple. Like it'll be like crazy looking, but it's just because that's whatever they had lying around plastic that they can use for the first shot. And so we get some really cool first shots because they're like crazy colors. And that's kind of to test out, just to make sure like everything's functioning. Like I said, like the articulation is moving right. And we're like checking everything along the way. And then we get after the first shot, we like tell them, oh, the arms are too tight. Like, can we loosen the joints up, or the button's not working? And they'll send us the next model, which the next model will actually have like color on it and start looking like it should and functioning a lot better. And then we get like basically 3 more models after that, or 2 to 3, really, depending on the toy and how complex it is. Again, hopefully that answered your question.
No, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
So we do see it from like the initial concept, which we're creating, and we work with many different people along the way to then see the final product and make sure it is doing exactly what it should. And we're also working with the packaging team as well the whole time. So one thing with the dinosaurs in particular we'd have to worry about was how long the tail was. And for him, this guy, like his tail is part of the mechanism, so it had to be on. We can't remove his tail because that's like all the mechanisms are here. So he's in a pretty big box, right? So this is like one of our bigger boxes. And we had to make sure like the packaging team like knows if there's going to be a try-me in the box, like, okay, you have to be able to move his tail. You have to like his head moves and all this stuff moves. We need space in the box so that a try-me would look cool, right? But he has to also be tied down in a way that no one's going to take him and steal him off the shelf. So we're also working very closely with them, and we're working with the copywriters to be like, this is what the toy does in the instruction sheet. This is what you have to, they'll give us the instruction sheet and be like, does this sound like, what should I change? Does this sound like how you would do it? And they'll give it to other people who've never seen the toy and be like, try to play with this toy. Do the instruction sheet make sense? Because I know it, right? I know what the toy is supposed to do. So it's easy for me to be like, yeah, that makes sense. But and we also work very closely like with kids a lot. Like if it's a toy that we're not sure if a kid's going to be able to maneuver as easily as an adult would, we have kids come in. Obviously with COVID, that changed a little bit. But we have kids come in and play with the toys. It's pretty cool. We have a whole room where like we have a resource center where they come in, and there's a room with like a double pane mirror, and the kids are in there playing, and we're just watching the kids from on the other side of the mirror and seeing like how they play with things. One of my favorites was we made these dinosaur masks where you like put the mask on, and the mask has a strap on the jaw. So when the kid opens the mouth, the mask opens. You may have seen these perhaps. But anyway, the kids, we wanted to make sure they like fit a little, like what age, how young a kid could be where this mask isn't too big and too like heavy on their head. So we had like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds come in and try them on and make sure they could function, like how small, if the whatchamacallit, chin strap needed to be, and all that kind of stuff. And so the kids were putting these masks on, and of course staring at themselves in the mirror and like going like, and like trying to do the jaw, and like there we are on the other side of the mirror, and the kids have no idea, right? They're just like staring and like making these crazy faces at us, and they have no idea. But it's pretty fun to see how the kids play with the toys you make. And sometimes they don't play with them the way you want, or they can't do it with their hands, like are too small and not dexterous enough. So then we make changes. We're like, it's too hard for the kid to do this. So we don't want bad reviews on Amazon for our toy, right? Like, if the toys break, or if the toy doesn't function the way it should be, or the kid can't even do it, like that's going to lead to bad reviews, and then that toy is not going to go anywhere, right? So we always try to make the toys like make sure they can't break, make sure they're functioning properly, and that like kids can actually play with them and enjoy playing with them.
So I have a quick question, because I'm a bit selfish. There are 5 minutes left.
Oh no, go ahead.
I always want my program here to be the best it can be. I sometimes have to fight mountains, but it's worth fighting for. But what tools do you use the most? Means if I was to activate classes and create things that would get students more ready to embrace a field like yours. Also, you said you can teach yourself these days without grad school, but through Udemy. I want to make sure you tell us a little bit more about that. Means, is it really something you think is possible? So 2 questions. What do I teach here to make it, better for the kids? And can you, once you get out, really teach yourself, and how?
Yeah. Yeah, great questions. So for me, I am almost always on Photoshop, just Photoshop. And every now and then I'll use Illustrator, which I can thank Cal Poly for, I learned tons of Illustrator at Cal Poly, and I feel like that I learned mostly Photoshop in grad school. But Illustrator comes in handy when I worked on some plush toys, and we did embroidery on the eyes, and some of our toys, we use DIJ on their faces, which is like direct inkjet printing, and that needs to be a vector file. So that's when Illustrator comes in handy. But for the most part, I'm doing Photoshop, and everything I do is on Photoshop. If you're a sculptor, obviously that's different. And like I said, some designers I work with do use ZBrush, and they use Rhino as well. And that's a great thing to have. I've taken some classes in those, but I would not say that's my strong suit at all. I've taken classes just to try to learn the basics, but I'm better at just drawing out what I'm thinking and having someone else sculpt it than sculpting it myself. I feel like the sculptor I work with who's on Minecraft uses those programs, because Minecraft is so just basically boxes, right? So it's very simple. But
do you use a Cintiq, or what do you use?
I do. Yeah, I have a Cintiq. It's right here.
We ask every year in this department. There is something called a lottery, and every year I ask for Cintiqs. Last year I asked for 12, and we always get denied. They buy kiln, they buy vinyl cutting, but they don't buy Cintiqs, and it blows my mind away. But that's okay. Me.
Yeah, that was one thing I always used. I guess it's still a Cintiq. What is it? I have it back here. Oh, I have a Wacom tablet that I always used before getting the Cintiq, which was great, but there, you're drawing here and it's showing here, so it's there's a difference. And I was so used to that, but then before I got the job at Mattel, when I was like really trying to make a new good portfolio, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna bite the bullet and I'm gonna buy a Cintiq.
They're not bad. They're actually $600 now.
Really, that's amazing. I think mine was 2,000. So
that's what I'm saying. And then they're like 16 inches. One are only $600. Is amazing.
Yeah. And then obviously once we have one at work, so it was nice during the pandemic. I had my personal one at home, and then the one at work I didn't have to bring home, and now I can go back and forth and not have to schlep one with me. But yeah, I do. The Cintiq is great if you can do it.
And what about getting that instead of grad school? You know,
yeah, I didn't learn about those things until during grad school, but I mean, there's a lot of like animators in particular, if you're looking for animation. As far as toy design, I'm not sure if there's as much, but that do their own classes. And there are people that work in the industry and are like super good, and they do their own classes, or they use there's CGA Academy or CG.
Yeah, that is expensive though. But there's a guy called Aaron Blaze that actually.
Yeah, he's great. He's like
amazing,
great classes.
And he's so
amazing.
affordable. Yeah, the CGMA Academy, I took them, but when it was affordable. Now they're like $600 a class. They're like outrageous. Yeah. So you get out of
grad school's expensive too, though. So
I'm just saying, you get out of a degree, university degree. Oftentimes you don't work, so you don't have that much money to splurge. But the Aaron Blaze classes are amazing. And if you have any others that you know about that you want to send out away,
Aaron Blaze is great. He's a really nice guy, and I met him at several of the animation conferences. And Ryan Woodward used to do classes, I think, or maybe it wasn't. Oh, I'll have to look. I haven't looked at the animation ones in a while, but
even drawing, animation is great. I love animation, but even like drawing classes. I mean, I know Udemy does okay, but some of the classes of Udemy are great, and some are not very good. Actually, you know what I mean? I guess you can wait for a sale and buy them for $10, so you don't lose much. So it's 11 o'clock, and I know my kids have to go. Anybody has one last question? Knowing that we are supposed to.
I actually, is it okay if I ask another question?
Yeah. And if you guys have to leave, feel free to leave. I have to leave too. I'm supposed to go to a meeting at 11:10.
No problem. I can hang back. I can hang on and answer some questions. Go ahead.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. I was planning to try to get my master's as well at the Academy of Art in San Francisco. I was actually looking into it, but I personally was unsure about like going into my master's right after I graduated, only because I wasn't sure how my portfolio was to like get into a master's program. And like I personally haven't really had any chances or like gone out to do any internships yet, and I've like started to try to like reach out and get into more internships, but because I was still so new to graphic design, like I still felt like I was like kind of lacking.
Sorry to cut you short, but we all have to go, and this video is going to take a while to process. So if you can wrap it up, it would be lovely. It means in like 4 minutes, I'm going to close this meeting.
Oh yeah. All
sorry.
right.
Just if you finish the question and then she answers, then we call it done. It would really be awesome.
I was just wondering like if it was possible, like how you built your portfolio for your master's program, essentially.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for Academy of Art, you do need a portfolio. I know that you'd need it for the masters, but I'm pretty sure for Academy of Art in particular, they allow everybody in because it's a smaller program. So your portfolio is not going to hurt you. But obviously, your portfolio should include a lot of any fine art drawings you have. Are you a graphic design major? Or
yes.
Okay. Like include that stuff, but obviously if it's animation that you want to get into, the more drawings and any concept art that you've done on the side, put that in there. I had some character designs that I sketched up for that portfolio, and my fine art work from Cal Poly, I put in there. But yeah, I would definitely look at concept art portfolios and try to like draw some props, draw some backgrounds, draw some character designs, and have that in there, but also show, look, I study graphic design, here's my graphic design stuff, and look, here's some fine art stuff I did, and have that in there. Because if you apply to other colleges like Ringling or any of the ones in LA, they will obviously be looking at your portfolio. And I know the Academy of Art, though, allows everybody in, whether you need a portfolio, but they allow everybody in.
So can I ask you something, Kristen? And if you don't mind, if there aren't any lingering questions like that that are more personal, do you mind if I give my student your email address and they can send
no
you an
problem.
email?
Yeah. And Tsunami, if I'd be happy to look at your portfolio too, if you want, once you do have it together, and give you advice or whatever. I'm happy to answer any questions on the side, and you can share my information, Enrica.
Thank you so much. I cannot wait to see you on Friday, March 24th, and
Yes.
treat you for lunch or whatever you want. So thank for taking the time to show us this. And I'm so proud of you. Your work is amazing.
Oh, thank you so much.
And it looks so much fun to work at Mattel. Maybe I should quit Cal Poly and see if I have a chance.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Thank you so much, you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.